In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a mosaic tile effect on your Sculpey bases. I've got a number of videos on how to bake the Sculpey and carve it, but for this video we're going to concentrate on the actual mosaic tile effect. Now originally, when I first started to do mosaic tile bases, I actually carved each one of these little tile pieces, and not only did that take a long time, but it didn't work well for small scale bases, especially say 25 and 30 millimeter bases like this. These designs, if you can see as I hold it this way, it's actually created just with paint, and that lets you translate the information to a much smaller surface. You could easily paint this design here because you're just using small liner brushes. Now you could still carve in all the little texture here if you wanted to, but it kind of takes some of the randomness out of the placement of these, because they are just, chips of glass, and when you try to carve it by hand, it tends to be a little bit too much like this. It's hard to get some of these little random shapes by carving, and you can do some more subtle effects with the paint. So what we're going to do is talk about some of the paints that we need here. We got this olive drab and the black. Not only is that going to be good for this outer edge of the base, but it's going to be helpful for some of these little outlines that we're going to do to distinguish some of the individual tiles. And you can see these colors pretty much used on both tiles. This is the design we'll focus on first. I think this will be a little bit easier for your first tile. So we have a few different colors of blue that you see, not just the blue here, but you can also see some of this verdigris in the lighter stones here versus these, which has, this is a Reaper color here, this Maiden Flash. You'll see that here. And then we've got a few colors, Cavalry Brown and the Brown Marin, to do some of this design. The Terra Earth color, use that around this edge. Also used it on the lion here as well. And this is kind of an interesting color here. This is made by Reaper, and I think that comes in blue, brown, and gray. I've gotten all three. This liner color can be very helpful for doing some fine lines. Say like around here, see this little, move this closer. This part of the design, brown liner was very helpful for that. And you might also see me use a few other products here. This Flow Improver, this also helps to thin down the paint, but you don't quite get the watermarks like you do when you just thin down your paints with water. And this Glaze Medium, sometimes I use this when I want to keep colors a little more active for longer. They don't dry quite as fast. And you can make these, they become translucent. You'll see them on the palette. There's a little, you can kind of mix your colors together for longer on the surface when you've thrown in some of the Glaze Medium. So that covers the bases and the paints. Next thing I want to talk about is the brushes and this palette that we're going to use. I've got some brushes laid out here on the palette that probably going to use almost every single one of these. The first ones I want to talk about, these you might not be as familiar with. And these are called filbert brushes. You can see I've got a few different sizes. This one is essentially a number 6. And I've got a 4 here. You see this common feature. See how it's this rounded edge to the brush? That really helps you do some feathery strokes this way, but when I turn it this way, you can see how that comes to a nice chiseled point here. So you kind of get the benefit, the best of both worlds. You get the chiseled point and this broad flat surface, but this round edge, you can really kind of do some nice blending with that, especially on a large scale. Now this next set of brushes here, these are number 8 rounds. These are actually, believe it or not, craft brushes. Got a package of them over here. Comes in a set of 10. You can see they're not terribly expensive. And if you look at these, they have a really nice tip. It will kind of degrade with use, and it sort of looks more like this after a while. But this tip actually is perfect for doing rough work, like getting your paint. And some of these areas are really, really rough. So why mess up your good brushes when you've got these? And we can just kind of smash in here and get all that paint down in there and not have to worry about destroying a much more expensive brush. Last group I'm going to talk about are liner brushes. Some of my favorites are from a company called American Painter. This is a number 10. And I love the liner brushes because you can put a lot of water, a lot of pigment. But unlike a spotter, these just kind of go and go and go. You could just go on forever with this liner brush, but still has a nice tip on it. The American Painter series, this Filbert's also American Painter. Prices on those also very nice. They may not last as long as, say, a Winsor Newton Kolinsky Sable, but they're nowhere near the same price. Here's something that's kind of halfway in between. This is Winsor Newton. This is sort of halfway in between the American Painter and a regular Winsor Newton Series 7. And basically I use these other brushes as much as possible, and I basically save my Kolinsky 7s here for the finest work. I think this is a 000 here. And that really, I just save that for generally any kind of fine lines that I want to do on the base. The last thing I'll talk about is this palette. This is a disposable palette. I'll put it out in front of the camera here. It's a disposable palette, 9 by 12, 40 sheets. It's really handy because when you need to clean up in between paint sessions, all you do is just take this and rip it off. It's a whole lot easier than washing off a porcelain tray like I used to do when I was painting watercolors. And here's the palette. Now I can still use this for a future project. So I got some open areas here, but we want a fresh palette to start out with. And there we go. So we've talked pretty much about all the supplies, everything we're going to use. And now we're going to get down to putting our design on the base. So before we draw out our design, just want to show you a little something. This is some research that I did. I went online and found as many references as I could of mosaics, and I think you can recognize some of these designs. Our lion here, and we've got this. And there's several that I found. There was a few dozen actually that I had found. You can recognize a pattern up here. I just wanted to print these out so you could kind of see these side by side and how you sometimes you can transfer this information to your base. I find it really helpful to have a reference like this nearby, and I think you probably will too. So with that, let's grab a pencil here, and let's translate our design. So I tried to make a piece of Sculpey similar in size to what we had over here. So what I'm going to do is start to draw this out. I'm not going to be terribly precise because sometimes the design just has to change based on how the colors are turning out, maybe where the miniature is going to stand. But if all of this is covered by the miniature, well, I'm not going to do a whole lot of work here. Generally, you're going to have a foot here, a foot over here, a foot over here. So I try to put less interesting things where the miniature's feet are going to be. So I'm going to try and do this central circle here. You could use a base like this if you wanted to maybe have a guide. So again, not worried about completely precise details. Let's have the inside of this circle. I'm not even sure. I think I did do a little bit of basic pencil drawing of the design at first, but sometimes I don't even do that. Sometimes I just start to work with the brush and see what happens. So let's do this. A little set of shapes here. This little wavy design down here. So let's do this little pattern here. I'm going to start out just this way. I'm not going to worry about the loops just yet. Because I want to make sure that they're relatively evenly spaced. You can tell by when you look at these, you can see that, again, because these are little pieces of cut glass, there's a lot of imprecise locations of some of these. That's good. We can reflect that in our design. Okay. So we've got general layout of the pattern. Now I can get a little more. I can put more detail in my drawing. At this point, there's not really much sense in doing that because a lot of it's going to get covered by paint anyway. But maybe you feel more secure by having everything drawn out in great detail first. That's fine. I think as you do more of these, with each one you do, you'll probably find your own little shortcuts. I know it's been the case for me. There's bases that used to take me many hours that now I don't even give a second thought to. They're just second nature. So that pretty much covers drawing out the design. Now at this stage, if you wanted to carve it out, you could, especially some of these larger elements, like the outlines of the circles, this pattern, this line, and maybe even follow along this. But again, this is all about just painting on the design, so we're going to focus on that first. So now with that there, I'm going to pull out this little right here. It's an empty paint container, a piece of sheet metal. got a magnet on the back of this, which lets me do this. So I can paint around the edge, paint around the top. You can see it's going to be a lot easier for me to kind of brace my hand, paint these designs, instead of having to put my hand along here, maybe damage what I've painted, kind of my fingers get in the way here. Nice and free. I can work on the side, can even spin this around, sitting on the palette. Gives me a lot of options. And since these are most likely going to be used in my army, and I have magnetized trays, well, very helpful. So let's get some colors on the palette and let's start painting. I'm going to start the process now, painting the outer edge. I didn't put all the colors out on the palette just yet. I have a few. These are kind of the first sets of colors. I've got this black and the olive drab. I'll start with a mix of that. And this is that kind of more distressed number 8 round. And what that lets me do is just, I can really stab the brush in. I might even shake the camera a little bit. That's just how aggressive I'm being with that. The Sculpey is really absorbent. You could prime your base first if you wanted to. I tend not to do that, mostly because I know that the Sculpey is really absorbent and it's going to hold the paint really well. It's not like a metal miniature or a resin miniature or anything like that. Now, you don't have to worry if it does cover up some of your design at this point. Just wipe it away and consider that some of your initial staining on your ancient mosaic base. Just gonna work my way around. Now you could, if you wanted to, start off a little lighter. And just added some of this, I think that's earth. Yeah, I think that's game color earth. And since this paint is going to stay wet for a little while, once I've kind of worked my way all around the base, I kind of let that go. And I'll focus on the main event up here. But I just wanted to throw out some colors on here for now. You can see this paint is relative. It's not watered down. It's just enough water to get it to flow across the surface. So that just about takes care of that. So we're all set. Got a little thing of water over here. I like to have those handy. Got my paper towel. So now, let's get to the top section. Again, gonna put some water out on the palette. A few different ways to approach this. You can see I've got I already have some nice color here that I can use, say, around this edge. What this is going to do is it's going to remind me that I want the outer rim of this, just like we did on our base here, to be a little bit stained. It's just kind of a general reminder to do that. And as you can see, I can still see my pencil lines. So now in this section, it's a little bit darker, a little more stained. Need to fill in this line and this part of the circle. You can see this, by virtue of this rounded edge on the brush, it's already kind of created a rounded shape. Now I'm going to bring out my wondrous craft brush here. It's got a pretty decent point for a 50-cent brush. I'm going to use that point brace and fill in this line here. Now I know I want this. This is also darker. So again, I can use my thumb, finger on the thumb, hold the brush, and it's like this cantilevered support system here. It's like a work crane. Everything is supporting itself. Twist the base around. Like so. So already we're getting a nice feel for this design. So let's fill in. I grab a little bit of that verdigris. Gonna mix it in. And the reason why my outer edge, the reason why I kept this out on the palette is I knew that I wanted to carry some of this color up on the top surface. So we've got that mixed together. And you can see this is relatively dark, but that's okay. Because as you can see, this is almost like pointillism here. These lighter dots were added on top of a darker layer like this. What that did was it meant I didn't have to draw out every single little bit of this. Every little mosaic piece, little piece of glass. I didn't have to draw out every single one. So what I can do is, since this is still wet, and then this is not the final. I just want to play around with this a little bit. Kind of work out, so I know where some of the lighter areas are going to be. This I'm going to keep darker down here. I'm not going to have too many bright points down on this end. I'm going to focus more up here with that. So what we need to do now is this here. You can see that's a little bit, this is going to be kind of another painting term. This is warmer. We just did this cooler section here. Got a warmer section on the inside. So look at the difference. This was the verdigris mixed with our color along the side here. This is the pale flesh mixed in with our lighter brown. And let's do this. And you can see I'm trying to preserve my pencil design so that it's a little bit easier for me to draw in my darker reds. Okay, and we know we wanted some action here, so let's grab some of that tan. Let's fill that in. Yeah, not trying to create any one specific shape, leaving it kind of, I don't know, leave it open to interpretation of the viewer. Even now, I can start to think about, okay, where are some of these points going to go? You can see how that's kind of glossy there. You can see I've worked very wet into wet. Now, I don't want to get too adventurous yet. I'm not going to introduce the red here because I don't want it to bleed into this. So, as I wait for that, see, this has started to dry a little bit. So now I can go back to my filbert brush here. It's been waiting. And let's grab some of these lighter colors. Took some of the olive drab, mixed it with that earth. Now, you can see there's a fair amount of pigment on this brush. I don't really dry brush. I actually call it damp brushing. What I'm going to do is see I'm holding the brush way down on the end of the handle. Not like this, not like the detailed work. Holding it on the side. And this is why we put all that nice sculpey texture there. Then we're just going to drag. It's not some violent thing like this, like you see lots of dry brushing. No, it's more targeted. Just dragging the brush along the surface. Just dragging it, and again, the nice thing about having on this little pedestal, look, I can just rotate this around, drag the brush along. I keep working this a little bit lighter. Again, still a fair amount of paint on the brush. And do the same thing. Just picking at kind of the top parts of the texture. Like so. See how feathered that is? But it's not going to have that, that choppy look that dry brushing gives. This is not dry brushing, this is just kind of scraping some of the paint off the brush. I can even put in some of the verdigris so that it's not all just the warm color. So just like that. See how that already starts to bring out over here too. So it's not so much, it's not about the amount of paint that's on the brush, it's about the amount of pressure that we're applying here. Kind of changing the color along the way. Back more to the tan. I go back to verdigris. Just like before, just picking out the lightest areas or the highest areas of the texture. Now I don't want the lights on this part of the base to be too intense, because again, we want them to focus up here. I want them to be the way we want to have neat stuff around the side. That's not where we want them to look. We want them to focus up here. Alright, so that's about what we're going to do. And later on, I may cover over this light edge here. Maybe I don't like how that translates. And everything can be adjusted later. Just because you painted it, it's not set in stone. It's not. This is just Sculpey. And this is just paint. It can be altered. So let's stop with that. So what you could have done also is, could use this here as well if you wanted to. Let's clean that off. I'm going to go back to that number 8 round so that we can put in the, looks like almost like a wave type pattern. So I'm going to water this down. Make sure I've got a decent point here. Brace my fingers together. Hopefully you can see. now we're going to paint this in. Every so often, maybe throw in a little more of the red. So I kind of start with the hook and work my way down this way. Connect them. Start with the hook. Down and connect. Now eventually, this part has to be wide enough to essentially accommodate one piece of broken glass. And now when I finish these last few parts of the red, I'm going to bring back the reference sheet and show you what I mean by that. And fill in this part to get it to match up with our inner circle. So I'm gonna make this a little bit thicker. I want it too thin. Okay, the reason I did that, so when we bring back our photograph here, I want to show you the outline of this shoulder. Well, you can only get so thin. You can see the thinnest line. All of these pieces of glass are about the same size. And the outline is only as thin as that piece of glass. See how thick these are in our little reference picture. So just like here, I want to make sure, see how that's kind of, let's get this a little closer. I wanted these to at least be the same width as one of these little pieces of glass that I drew out. So we're good on our red. At this point, means I can bring out some of the blue. Let's throw it right here. It's not going to take a whole bunch. So we got this on the end of the brush. That's going to go in here. Now I could throw out a dark blue if I wanted to shade this. I think I'm going to pull out the blue liner paint. I talked to you about the brown liner. So we're going to use the blue liner to paint in the darks on this section. All we're trying to do here is just, alright, that's where that shape needs to be. Let's put this little circle here. Let's mirror the design. So I'm going to grab some of that blue liner, put that out right next to. See, that's somewhat transparent, which is what I wanted. What I'll do is mix it in with the lighter kind of sky blue color that I had, so let's darken this down. And here's where I like to sometimes carry one color into another. So what I'm going to do is let this dry a little bit, and we'll get into the next part of our base. At this point, I want to take my liner brushes. I want to start to put in some of the darker lines in the tiles, kind of maybe pick out some individual bits. There's that brown liner that I talked about earlier. I'm going to set that over here on the palette. I'm going to have to shake this pretty good. It will separate. Now this paint is already, it's nice, it's very dark, but it's already watered out, because look at this. As I take my liner brush, and look what I can do with that. It's not quite so easy to do with this paint. It tends to kind of breaks up a little bit. The brown liner, it's already so watered down. Now we can water it down even more. A little bit of this flow improver. It doesn't take a whole bunch. I just usually throw a dot out on the palette. So between these two, see how translucent that is? But you're not going to quite get the watermarks. But you see around here, see this thing here, you get this edge here. It's the water doing that. You won't get quite as much of that when you mix flow improver and thin things down this way. So you can see I've got a nice point on that brush, and I've got a fair amount of pigment. What we're going to do is we're going to brace the thumb together with the finger, and now see and I try and spin this around because it's just easier for me to continue this shape in this direction. So I'll get some more. So this is basically doing some outlining here. Same thing along this. Even on these areas of blue here. It's like a little bit of an outline there. And I'm just going to move around the entire base. It's not all the same thickness with this outline. In some places it's thicker, some places it's thinner. Just like that. Spin this around. So you can see what I'm trying to do is move the base around because it's harder. This is a harder angle for me. So to make that angle easier, I spin this around. I guess because I'm right-handed, it's easier for me to do it this way. See how this is much darker. I wanted that because, well, guess what? I think you could tell, and looking at this page, you can tell this is kind of the center of interest right here. This is where we're going to have the most contrast between the lights of these white, off-white pieces and this darker pattern. So I have to think of differences in color temperature. That's one way to get contrast. And probably the more well-known way is, it's called value contrast. It's basically light versus dark. And we're doing all of them because we have warm colors and cool colors next to each other. But we're also going to have some of the brightest colors next to some of the darkest colors. And I'm just going to work my way around. And I'm not making this outline. You can see that the outline is not this perfect It's not about getting a perfect straight line, because what we're going to do is almost play some connect the dots. This is what it's all about here. So that's why I'm not worried about having a line that's completely smooth, perfect. But you can see how well the paint is flowing. As I move around, do that again over here, same thing. I'm going to strengthen this line again. And now I can think about starting to put some mosaic pieces here. Let's get this maybe a little closer to the camera, just to make sure you can see what it is that I'm doing here. And while this may seem tedious, but it's all well worth it. And believe me, this is still easier than trying to carve out individually each one of these little tiny pieces. You can see why I'm using a brush. And again, when I first did that initial base and I carved it all out, boy, that took forever, and it took a while to paint too. And I felt like I was kind of painting in all the texture that I had carved. And I thought, well, this is insane. Why am I carving it and then painting it all again? Why not just paint it on the first time? Slowly working around the base, making sure that I introduce some flow improver into the brown liner paint. And I don't mind it being a little bit transparent, translucent, whatever you want to call it, because I don't want we don't want every single line to be perfect and very stark. See, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to pick out. So now we're all still working on the darker parts. Eventually, kind of the thing that really shows it off are those brightest areas. So I'm gonna right here. See how that line is broken right there? That's done intentionally. So let's designate a few individual pieces of broken glass, broken ceramic, an intersection here. Now I might throw a few accent colors out on the palette later on as we start to do our final light areas. Might just do that. Maybe throw out some yellow, because sometimes the sunlight catches a piece in just a certain way, because maybe it's when it was laid into the floor, it's at a slightly different angle than some of the other little chunks. And see, I'm not focusing a whole lot of detail on this part here. Again, that's on the outer edge. It's kind of broken away. So let's finish off some of this. And now I'm going to do even more with the flow improver, because again, I don't want these lines to be too dark. So see how transparent that is in comparison? But unlike water, it doesn't really spread around the way water might. And you won't get quite the watermarks either. And in some ways, this is a little bit like drawing out cobblestones. I think it kind of has a cobblestone look to it right now. Let's keep this going here. Gonna work into our sections here of the design. Don't be afraid to spin this around and hold it in a different direction. Now you're gonna see right here, I'm gonna emphasize a little more right here. Spin this around again. Let's do some work down here. You can see just how thin some of these lines are that we're applying. All the while remembering that I've got all of this stuff is made from individual little pieces of glass and ceramic. We are exaggerating maybe a little bit on the scale, because if these pieces would be several inches across if you just did a 28mm figure on this. But if it's a monster, all of a sudden, well, these little pieces are going to look smaller than if it's just, say, maybe a hoplite or whatever. So same thing here. And this is all about setting up those later, kind of more dramatically light colors. You could even, and I've done this on some of my mosaics. What if there's a piece missing? Let's designate. Let's see here. There's a piece missing. There's a piece missing. There's a piece missing over here, and that's just a matter of painting some dark color and just leaving that alone and not putting any light in. So we've just about worked our way all the way around. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the liner paints can do, especially when used with a liner brush. And that little bit of flow improver, so you can see, you don't get the watermarks like you do over here. I'm not really sure what chemical properties there are to the flow improver. So I can see I need some here. I want some to be much darker. You could even stop here if you wanted to. If you want this to be a little more subtle, a little darker, you could just stop right here. That would be fine too. But I want to show you what's possible with some of the brighter highlights. So I'm going to set that brush aside. And I'm going to... Here's another use for some of your liner paints. You can even use this to put some shading on this part of our base. You could use it to paint in cracks. I'm using the liner brush again. It's very thin. I could paint in cracks if I wanted to. again, this here, I'm not quite sure I want that to be so light, so I'm going to knock that down. Same thing over here. Ah, it's better. So we're just kind of staining the edge of this dirt. I'm going to keep these highlights over here. So I want to keep some of that, I want to preserve some of that. But on this edge, I feel like I want to show some staining there. Could also have done this with other colors. We could have, say, done some kind of a wash here. Get a few of these secret weapons out. Just going to show you an example. Shake this up. Throw this out. So this is sewer water. Well, that's staining. All right. See what we've got here. Throw this out. And do some staining around the edges. And you can wipe it away if you want to feather this out a little bit. Put some here. What's nice about, say, this is a little one of the more intense washes. That's what happens when we mix it with regular paint. So I just took this flash. What happens when I mix it together? It's a whole new pink color. And this will have a slightly different feel to it because it's got this weird kind of opaque, it's kind of milky. That's intentional. I do that especially on some of my concrete bases. I like to have that sort of not transparent but not opaque. Alright, so at this point, I'll leave this go, maybe let some of this dry, and then we're going to start to work in some of our darks. I'm sorry, work in our lights. We've got our darks. We want light. So here we get to our section where we bring out the bright parts of our individual little mosaic pieces. Now to kind of build off what we did over here, mixing that light with the sewer wash right there, or sewer water. Take some of this blue black, shake it up pretty well. I'm going to set this up next to my blues over here. I'm going to kind of try the same thing. So I don't need a whole bunch. And I've got the number 8 Sensational Craft brush here. Don't necessarily want to use the liner brush because to create this pointillism effect, let's see if I can get this here. I don't want a tiny brush, I want actually a little bit bigger tip here. So just like we did with this, take some of this blue, and now that we get a whole new range of colors. And the nice thing is that they are pre-thinned. So instead of having to use water as a thinner, or even the flow improver, which has no color at all, we've kind of created some new colors here. You can see how thin this is. Watch this. Watch me drag that all across the palette. So, what I want to do is, since I've got the blue on the brush, now I'm going to start to do a few little dots. And I'm going to start to work lighter. What I'm going to do, let's get this a little closer here. Pick out one there, one there, one here, one here, maybe one down here, but then stop. Don't want to do every single little point, just a few. And so what I'm trying to do, see, I'm trying to match these other pieces of broken glass around it. So I stop there. Now this, I'm not going to put too many pieces of light because I wanted this to be a little bit stained, so let's just stop right there. Twist this around, make sure it's better for me to work with, and a few right there, one here, one here, here. That's what we've saved some of this verdigris for. And see, there's still a little bit of this secret weapon wash in the brush. Let's see how that still flows pretty nicely. Got a slightly lighter color, and I'm just gonna, this is where I want some of the lightest of these little blue pieces to be. So I'm gonna pick this right here, one here, one here, maybe there, there, stop. Gonna have even more of the verdigris. Pick up that much and leave it go, because we wanted to have this be our lightest part. So let's take a tiny bit of that. And now I'm going to pull out these pieces of glass right here. Every so often, a little piece, just like that. What this does is it strengthens some of the contrast along this edge. That's how we started with the dark first. So more of this blue, really, really light blue along here, right up to the edge of this part of the design. See if I can preserve some of these missing pieces of mosaic here. Now along here, where it's more stained, well, I'm going to put in some more of that armor wash. Look at how that tones that down. Not armor wash. It's a similar type of wash. I use that a lot, but this is the sewer water. So what this is going to do, see how it's toning this down. So that is not as bright as this. And again, we're saving. Now that's not quite on the screen. That's almost pure verdigris and a few very bright tile pieces. A few more of these really bright ones right up to the edge. like that. When I set it down on this, you can really see how that starts to pop there. Now, by the same token, you wanted to do same thing here. And you saw I went into the little bit of the sewer water and then into that flesh color. Again, it's de facto water. It's like we're watering down the paint to make it flow a little better, except it's water that actually has color in it. When I used to do my watercolor paintings, there were times where I actually painted with my dirty rinse water. That may kind of sound like a sacrilege to some folks, but it was one way to ensure unity of color when your water pretty much has all the colors you've been using in it. So here, look, I even went with almost straight sewer water wash. Now this is more of the flesh color. And all the while thinking of kind of this pointillism. It's several points of color. And see how the brush here, it's not quite to a point that's good, because what that lets me do is this. That's why I'm using this brush instead of one of the tiny little liner brushes. So I feel like I want to do some along this outer edge to make sure it doesn't get too bright. I go into my sewer water, pull that out over here too, maybe. I think I want a little bit. Down here I want some. And I'm going to put out just a little more of the pure flesh color. So I can put a couple of dots right here, where again I want my highest contrast to be. I'll leave that alone. I'm going to maybe throw one or two elsewhere. So again, our lightest, the lightest of the verdigris, the lightest of the flesh color, the lightest of our blue. It's all focused around here. In all likelihood, your footprint of a miniature will be foot here, foot over here. So you can see we have kind of the least interesting action going on either side. All the main stuff going on here, because guess what? You'd still be able to see that. And while I have this lighter color here, pick out some of these edges of the rocks. One of the last things we're going to do is our this is the reds here. There's some of that cavalry brown. I guess now this is not really going to affect the color very much, but again I'm thinning down the paint. Time to throw. Let's make sure we've got this so we can see that. Just like we did everywhere else. Picking out individual tile pieces. Now if I feel the need, when I have this set aside right here, this set aside, I might throw out a little bit of this. There we go. And mix it in with that cavalry brown. Add a little bit of the sewer water included to make sure it flows nicely. This is about, I think this is about as light as I want to go. Some of these reds. Yeah, maybe a tiny bit lighter on a few select pieces. And let's do that now. Again, to the sewer water, what that did, see how that yellowed that down? Kept it from getting too pink, too chalky. I do that a lot with my miniatures. I'll actually use some of the glazes and washes as either paint color or as tinting my paint colors. So there we go. So we've got some nice exciting stuff here. I go back to my liner brush. Let's see if that brown liner is still... Nope, I'm going to put a little bit of that out. Tiny little bit there. Because I feel like I want to reinforce a few lines. Now that we've got our dots out, see how there's a little bit of a stair-step pattern in there? That's good. Because you can see it's a little bit of a stair-step pattern. What I want to do is solidify a few select, like right here. That, it's all kind of right in this area, and I want to get some definition. Now let's say, grab some of this. This is looking too much like a dark, just a dark mass. Let's make this a little more interesting. So when I did there, that just, I don't know, I felt like I wanted something more there. And here, there's a few little touches of yellow. We can do that. We'll add some of this. It's just, I think this is, it's the Reaper High Density Pale Saffron. It's going to add a few little dots of it over here. Okay. So again, you can take this as far or not far as you want. What I'm going to do now is just want to put the black band along the side here, because that kind of lets me know just how dark my darks are. Let's just do this, work our way around. So yeah, I think that's, I don't need to go any darker. I think my darks are dark enough. It's all about kind of judging one color next to another. So we work our way all around. And we've got ourselves a nice little mosaic base. Now we started out with the complicated pattern. I know I had showed you earlier this. I thought, well, what if you want to keep your mosaic something a little more manageable? Maybe if you're first time around, you want to try something much easier. Let's just draw out this right here. Forget the lion. Just work on this. Sort of mirrors this right here. And this is kind of the perfect base for it. Now you could follow along the edge of this 25mm base. What I'm going to do is keep this a little more interesting and set it on an angle. See what I'm doing? Now you could use the straight edge for this too, if you wanted. So what I've done is just made a basic L shape. And then I'll divide it into 3. Just like that. This way, same thing. I'll divide it into 1, 2, 3. And now, trying to keep these the same size, what I'm going to do is just draw out some more of these tiles back this way. Now, to keep this even more interesting, maybe this is marble here. Maybe it's marble on the outside, or maybe it's... So what we can do is indicate. We don't have to do a full design here. We can just indicate that there's something here. Maybe out here is marble. Just like we did the previous base. Work on our edge first. This I've just got blue tacked to my little used up paint jar. Alright. So I'm going to get out some of my light colors again and squeeze out some of that. And let that mix with my sewer water wash. And just like we did with the other bay, we're going to start a little bit darker and put the lights on over the top. Verdigris is still alive. So let's use some of that here. You can see my lines are still, I can still see. It's pretty faint, but I can still see my lines. Let's mix this together. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry. Back this way. Actually, before that dries, maybe show something here. Back to this sewer water. So I'll show you kind of the advantage of having this be wet into wet. Let's just do this. See how I'm kind of pulling these colors together? That can do that because when I set this on its side, see how shiny that is? See how it reflects the light? This is all still relatively wet. So right away, it already looks nice and stained. So I'm going to dry this off. I'm going to start to put in some more little blue tiles. Now before, you saw me use the brown liner paint to draw in the dark spaces in between the mosaic pieces. This time we're going to use blue liner, because we can also mix that with our lighter blue. So there's our blue liner. And I'm back to my liner brush. And let's rebuild our lines here. Let's see if you can make sure you can see that. I'm trying to stay away. I don't want this corner to necessarily touch, because that, again, is another art term. It's a tangent, and it's one of those kind of visually disturbing things. It's a way to kind of freak out the person looking at your base. Don't want to do that. So remember, we have our three lines. Now here, this line's going to be a little more solid. There's going to be fewer breaks in it than there was on our other base. And it's just kind of how this pattern is. And we'll do the same thing this way. Just making my three lines. So there's the first one, here's the second one. And the third. And now, it's like we did before with the pencil. Let's turn it this way. It'll be easier to, there we go. Okay. Well, I've got some color here. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take some of the blue liner and some of the regular blue paint and make move this up so you can see this. Call this my palette within a palette. There's kind of the global palette here, but here's my local palette. And it starts out with my lightest blue here, and it works its way up into the darkest blue. Let's start with some of the darker blue. And what we need to do is make this pattern, which is surrounding one white piece with 8 blue ones. I got one blue piece surrounded by 8 of the white, which means we're back to the blue again here. See, I'm grabbing different shades of blue, some lighter, some darker. Spin it around this way. one blue, surrounded by 8 white. And reverse that. With 8 blue surrounding that one little white dot. So we've got that pattern. I'm going to go into blue liner, and let's say let's put a design in here, something that we can't see. And since there's really nothing there, I'm going to show there's something here. Because when we saw this, they had to work their way around. So let's see how this, you can see this. It's easier to see it on mine. So I had to follow around the outline of that line. Well, let's just give a hint that it's there. Remember, we're going to be putting some lighter colors on this. And actually let that just be a shape there, some kind of random shape. And maybe out here, maybe this is not mosaic. Maybe we're just going to leave that. So I'm going to use this to bring back some of the darkest portions of our line. Down here, same thing. So maybe here, well, we've got our dark paint. Let's just do some cracks. That emanate from our mosaic. Just like that. So we've played around with the dark an awful lot. Now it's time to bring back some lighter colors. Now I've already got some of the that flesh color. I'm going to bring out another secret weapon. Of course, this is dark sepia. There it is. And here we go. Now I'm not using the other brush, that number 8 round that we had used to get that pointillism effect. Here I want a little more control because these are square cut pieces. So you can see I'm going after some individual. I'll leave that one alone. I think I'm going to make these a little lighter. That. And let's go even lighter. On a select few. Now what can be fun, you see here, where it's dark, we've actually got some light lines. Well, let's try some of that. Okay, where some of the blue ones are, what we're going to do is go just like that. I don't want to get too bright with this. What I'm going to do is put a little accent on this crack here. Little tiny bit, just that much. Alright, now I will go back to this. And I'm going to pick out a few points here. Just like we did with the other base. So we can do more, we can do less. We can go back into this blue. If you wanted to make this some of these lighter, we could. You could have highlighted the upper surface of this blue. Let's use some of the verdigris, mix it with some of the blue. Spin this around so you can see this. So there we've got our nice simple pattern, and that's ready for a miniature.
Your docket best. Well, here is the place where you can join the